That includes the man hired to kill a family of 4 here in Houston, sentenced to death. Xavier Davis pleaded guilty. That's to capital murder charges last month. Investigators say Davis was hired by a woman named Alexis Williams to kill the family of her ex-girlfriend, Xavier Lagway. Lagway's 10-year-old
Xavier Davis thought he had outsmarted the system. By pleading guilty to one of the most shocking crimes Houston had ever seen, he believed a jury might spare his life. But instead of mercy, he received the harshest punishment possible, a death sentence. So what did Davis do that left 12 jurors convinced he could never be free again? The case began with a late-night break-in that tore apart an entire household. A mother, her partner, and their little girl never made it out alive. 2 younger children did, but only because one of them, just 10 years old, had the courage to stay calm, hide her fear, and pretend not to move until the danger was gone. Investigators later said Davis wasn't working alone. They claim a betrayal from someone close to the family had set this tragedy in motion. And when those details surfaced in court, the jury made their choice. Davis would leave the courtroom not just guilty, but bound for death row. June 30th, 2021, Southwest Houston. By 10:35 p.m., the sidewalks along 12101 Fondren Road were quiet, a late June heat still clinging to the air. Inside an upstairs apartment, a young family wound down. Gregory Carhey, 35, and Xavier Lagway, 29, finishing a long day, their children nearby, the kind of ordinary weeknight Houston knows well. Then, in minutes, everything changed. About an hour earlier, a man named Xavier Davis had carjacked a rented Jeep Compass near the 1000 block of Larkwood, holding 2 brothers at gunpoint and speeding away into the night. Investigators would later say that stolen Jeep became the bridge between 2 scenes, a roadside robbery and a family's home. Witnesses and digital breadcrumbs would later outline the approach. The Jeep arriving at the Fondren Road complex, an intruder entering, a demand for money, and then a burst of violence so fast it lasted only minutes. When it stopped, Gregory and Xavier were fatally shot, as was their 6-year-old daughter, Harmony. The apartment was not ransacked. Phones and jewelry still lay inside, an eerie stillness replacing the chaos. And yet, there was survival. Their 10-year-old daughter had been shot, a round shattering bone in her arm. But she did the unthinkable for a child. She played dead. When the attacker left, she gathered her baby brother, locked a door, and FaceTimed her grandmother for help, describing a shooter dressed in dark clothing and begging someone to come. Her quick thinking saved 2 lives that night. A 3rd sibling, about 8 years old, wasn't home. Family would later say that absence spared him. The killer fled down the stairs and out to the parking lot, where the stolen Jeep waited beneath sodium lights. In the hours that followed, that vehicle would be found burned in Pearland, Brazoria County. A fire set to erase evidence, but one that didn't destroy everything. What remained would steer detectives straight back toward a name. Patrol cars, then detectives, then crime scene technicians converged on 12101 Fondren Road. Yellow tape went up. Neighbors whispered in clusters along the breezeways. Officers moved carefully through rooms that still held the markers of family life. Small shoes by the door, a TV remote on a cushion. In those first hours, only a few facts were certain. 3 people were dead. A 10-year-old survivor was wounded and brave. An infant was physically unharmed, and whoever had done this had moved with chilling purpose and left fast. By sunrise, the case already gripped Houston. It would soon stretch outward, from Larkwood to Fondren, from Pearland to a West Fuqua Street apartment, toward an arrest that raised even harder questions. Was this simple robbery or something planned? And why did a child have to pretend to die to live? Those answers would carry this story all the way to a Harris County courtroom in 2025, and to a sentence that made headlines across Texas. Amid the investigation, a clue surfaced nearly 8 miles away. In a grassy field in Pearland, off Hatfield Road, a burned-out Jeep Compass lay charred. Forensic teams rushed in under flare-lit darkness. The vehicle, later revealed to have been carjacked earlier that night near Larkwood, was more than a burn victim. It was a crime scene. Investigators would confirm the car had belonged to 2 brothers planning to leave Houston when Davis intercepted it at gunpoint. Despite its destroyed condition, the Jeep yielded one critical piece of evidence: a cell phone lying unlocked inside. It held only 2 numbers, one of them Davis's mother's. That minor detail became major lead. Detectives connected the phone to Davis and now had a path forward, through Pearland, past the Fondren complex, to the killer. Simultaneously, the survivor's hospital testimony became the human compass of the investigation. Between sobs, she described a masked intruder in black demanding money, rattling off the phone call she made. "A man shot Mom, Dad, and my sister." Those precise words replayed a violence she barely survived and set the tone for what investigators were chasing. As word spread through law enforcement, the stolen Jeep became a beacon. The Brazoria County Vehicle investigators flagged it immediately once it was reported stolen. Wrist cameras from officers at the burning site captured images later matched to the rental. Meanwhile, in Houston, detectives traced surveillance showing Davis around 8:30 p.m. that night, near his ex's apartment complex. The timing lined up. It preceded the carjacking and the gruesome rampage that followed. On July 1st, around 2:30 p.m., officers descended on Davis's girlfriend's apartment in the 4800 block of West Fuqua Street. Body-worn camera footage showed his stunned expression as officers arrested him. In his pocket, $3,240 in cash, red-tipped bullets matching those found at the crime scene, and further inside the apartment, a silver revolver, believed to be the murder weapon, lay discarded beside a shoebox of bullets. With Davis in custody and the car burned out, police had the threads they needed: forensic matches, surveillance timelines, survivor testimony, and the recovered weapon wove a damning narrative. Every piece pulled him closer to the crime, and the case began to close, crushingly fast. At that moment, the Houston Police Department had captured more than a suspect. They had captured the man who pulled the trigger and forwarded the first concrete inch toward justice for an entire devastated family. And for 10-year-old survivor, the nightmare of that night had only just begun. Houston's streets have many stories, but few as haunting as that of Xavier Maurice Davis. Long before his name became synonymous with horror, his life was already fractured. Born into chaos, Davis's early years were steeped in poverty, neglect, and abuse. His mother, Tawanica Pope, became a teen mother with little support. She later testified in court that her son, even as a child, seemed wired wrong, unable to understand authority, always running with the wrong crowd, her efforts to guide him falling short. When Davis was barely 10, his life spun further out of control. A court officer recalled picking up a runaway Xavier from a relative's home. "He had the saddest eyes I'd ever seen in a child," she later said. But that sadness gave way to anger. By 2006, at just 13 years old, he was arrested for stealing a bicycle. That first crime set off a spiral: robbery, retaliation, and eventually, the Texas Youth Commission, where isolation stood in for rehabilitation. At trial, Davis's older brother recounted horrific scenes: beatings with extension cords so severe they drew blood, clothing ripped away in punishment, and a childhood overshadowed by fear and violence. Police recalled mothers lashing out, their resolve hardened by desperation. Davis's mother denied responsibility, but her son's broken face told a different story. Although Davis and his brothers shared those same hardships, only Xavier became violent. His younger brother built a life and a business. The older avoided violence entirely, showing the bloody difference between survival and destruction. Experts weighed in. Dr. Howard Henderson, a criminal justice professor, called Davis the poster child of adverse childhood experiences. A life steeped in instability, no love, no role models, no chance, becomes a factory for crime. Poverty didn't just strain him, it shaped him. As Davis grew into adulthood, crime became his only curriculum. Reckless driving, armed robbery, parole violations. Every run through the justice system deepened the chasm between him and the possibility of redemption. By the time he was 32, he had spent more years behind bars than free. Prosecutors would later warn jurors, this wasn't a man you could confine. He was a danger just waiting to be released. Still, throughout the trial's punishment phase, his defense returned to that courtroom portrait, a child who never stood a chance. His aunt's tears, his grandmother's addiction, his fractured family, the isolation of juvenile detention. His attorneys called for life, not death, suggesting the system had failed him before he ever knew what it meant to live. But courts heard that testament of trauma and weighed it against a brutal truth. Davis executed a family, extracted payment from sorrow, killed a 6-year-old. That night on Fondren Road wasn't the result of environment. It was a choice a man made again and again. In a cold courtroom, Judge Brian Warren denied Davis bond, citing danger to the public. He remained locked behind barbed walls, from his teenage years to the jail cell where he awaited trial. Locked in, unheard, but never free. Now, only time separates that suffering childhood from closure. The trial begins in early 2025, and in a world where a child's broken past meets a brutal crime, the scales of justice must finally balance. The Harris County Criminal Justice Center in Houston held its breath as Xavier Davis, charged with the killings of 29-year-old Danya Vialagwe, 35-year-old Gregory Carhi, and their 6-year-old daughter Harmony, stood accused of an unforgettable horror. But as the trial opened in early 2025, the courtroom was blindsided. Davis unexpectedly pleaded guilty, acknowledging his role in the brutal killings. Yet the plea, far from invoking mercy, seemed to inflame the jury. From the start of the punishment phase, prosecutors laid out a chilling truth. Davis wasn't a lone wolf. He was a hired hitman, recruited by Alexis Williams, the ex-girlfriend of the murdered mother, Danyavia. Investigators say Williams, driven by jealousy and rage after their breakup, paid Davis to carry out the massacre and pointed him directly to the apartment at 12101 Fondren Road. Evidence even suggests she watched the killings unfold via video chat. Williams, now 32, was arrested in March 2022 and holds the same capital murder charge, but her trial won't start until later this year. Inside the courtroom, the emotional weight fell heavily. Photographs of the lifeless forms of Danyavia, Gregory, and Harmony were displayed. A survivor, then 10, now 14, took the stand, her arm scarred from a bullet she sustained as she played dead, shielding her 1-year-old brother. She stared down Davis and recounted how he kicked in the door, demanded cash, hurled her brother across the room, and shot her family in cold blood. Turning to the defense, attorney Michael Gonzalez tried to shift the narrative away from horror towards origin. He described Davis's disrupted upbringing, trauma, juvenile cells, no guidance, no breaks. He argued the jury should see Davis less as a monster and more as a casualty of a broken system. But prosecutors fired back decisively. Assistant District Attorney Sean T.R. painted a damning portrait. Out of the 32 years of his life, Xavier Davis has spent more time behind bars than free. His guilty plea, T.R. insisted, was not a confession of remorse. It was a calculated ploy to avoid the death penalty. The courtroom fell into hushed disbelief as Davis's life behind bars unfolded. Repeated arrests for theft, aggravated robbery, parole violations, alleged arson. He burned the car used in the getaway in Brazoria County. Assaults on officers. His record read like a litany of failures and danger. As emotions churned and the evidence mounted, the jury deliberated. Hours later, they returned with a verdict: death. 12 jurors affirmed the system's harshest punishment, not for a momentary lapse, but for a life choice that extinguished 3 lives, one of them a 6-year-old child. Judge Brian Warren confirmed the sentence. Davis, who had pleaded guilty in hopes of staying alive, now found himself on a straight path to Texas death row in Livingston, awaiting execution. Meanwhile, Williams's trial remains on the calendar. Her courtroom fate still hangs. Her plea not guilty, her story not yet told. In that stark hallway outside the courtroom, shackles clicked. Davis, once the survivor of neglect, had become the architect of destruction, and now the man destined to await death behind strengthened steel bars. In the end, the trial wasn't defined by Xavier Davis's cold attempts to manipulate the system, or by Alexis Williams's twisted role in hiring him. It was defined by the voice of a child, 10 years old, Trembling, but unbroken, she sat before the court and told the truth no one else could. She spoke of the terror in her home, the screams, the gunfire, and the unbearable silence that followed. She described how she had to pretend to be dead, holding her breath while her world was torn apart, and how she survived when her mother and little sister did not. Her testimony pierced through every legal argument, every attempt Xavier made to lessen his guilt. The jury didn't just hear evidence, they felt the weight of a child's courage. And in that moment, the case became more than a trial. It was about justice for a family destroyed, about a little girl who had lost almost everything but refused to be silenced. When the verdict came, it carried the power of her words. Xavier Davis was found guilty, his fate sealed not just by forensic evidence or witness statements, but by the unwavering bravery of a survivor. Alexis Williams, the woman who orchestrated it all, still awaits her own day in court. But the shadow of what she set in motion will follow her forever. As the gavel struck, the little girl stepped down from the stand, clutching her teddy bear, walking with the quiet dignity of someone far beyond her years. In her courage, she became the light in a story drenched in darkness. Justice had been served, but it was her strength that ensured her mother and sister's voices would never be forgotten. And so, the Xavier Davis case closed, not with the name of a hired killer, but with the courage of a child who refused to let evil have the last word.